nationalism, reparations, and social justice, not to mention his more familiar writings on citizenship, racial equality, voting rights, civil disobedience, and nonviolence. These dual phenomena of ritual celebration and intellectual marginalization are, we believe, connected, and their entanglement presents both an immediate obstacle and a significant risk to any scholarly venture that aims to examine King's political and philosophical arguments with rigor, clarity, and intellectual integrity. Such efforts must avoid crashing upon the shoals of the dominant narrative of the civil rights era, which portrays the movement only as a moment of intensive activism, legal struggle, and moral suasion, focused on extending the existing rights and opportunities promised in America's founding documents to those African Americans living under the shadow of Jim Crow in the South. This master narrative of the civil rights movement, with its heroic cast of characters, narrow geographic focus, and short time frame from 1954 to 1968, draws heavily on the formal qualities and figurative elements of romantic historical narratives. In calling certain histories romantic, we mean to indicate that their sense of what matters, their contentions about meaning and significance, and the world they purport to describe, reveal thematic preoccupations similar to those of romance in literature. Although these elements of historical writing and discourse are often treated as merely stylistic, sustained attention to these qualities can help to bring to light the judgments about truth, ethics, and politics that subtly inform most renderings of the past and the lessons we are meant to draw from them. If, as Martha Nussbaum has argued, style itself makes its claims, then we may see these stylistic questions of narrative form and genre as expressing a sense of life and of value, a sense of what matters and what does not. In the domain of the civil rights movement, romantic narratives tend to organize the time frame, geographic focus, and leading characters of civil rights history around the creation and culmination of presumed national unity from racial division, as well as the story of triumph or transcendence over the evils of racial oppression. Consequently, they rely heavily on themes like a politically unified and heroic black community forged from disarray, a redeemed American citizenry overcoming its long racial divide to forge a more perfect American Union, or progressive histories that mark discontinuities between racial orders in American history, for example, the break between the Jim Crow regime and the post-civil rights era, as sharp, transcendent, and culminating victories. Invoking this sort of narrative, Cass Sunstein approvingly argues that the lesson to be drawn from the movement, which unfolds within the conceptual boundaries of the nation-state, national identity, and American federalism as the domain of unity, is that the political and philosophical substance of the civil rights movement is conservative and backward-looking. In other words, the defining meaning of the civil rights movement is understood as a derivative of long-standing American ideals, enshrined within the founding documents, and thus most crucially realized via the impassioned insistence that America simply live up to its creed. From this vantage, what appears most innovative and valuable about the civil rights movement and the intellectual contributions of leaders like King is essentially tactical and rhetorical. This way of thinking trains our imagination and judgment to focus on those moments where the words of civil rights activists seem to most forcefully rearticulate a deep political consensus at the heart of American public culture, while dramatizing how racial exclusions violate these commitments. Indeed, despite the current proliferation of interdisciplinary studies of African American political thought by a handful of scholars, many political philosophers cleave to an old idea advanced by the Swedish social scientist Gunnar Myrdal in his enormously influential tome An American Dilemma, The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy, 1944. This is the deeply misguided notion that black politics and political thought can be reduced largely to strategic thinking concerning how best to advance black interests by exploiting convictions and sentiments widely held among whites, and the rhetorical identification of black interests with the most deeply cherished American ideals and practices. In light of this inheritance and its operative narratives, we should not be surprised to find that King is uniquely vulnerable to having the richness and complexity of his thought ignored. His contributions, once shunted into this truncated realm of rhetoric and protest meant to unmask racial hypocrisy, seem ill-fitted for the disciplinary preoccupations of most political philosophers. Even more perniciously, the triumphalist themes of overcoming and progress, characteristic of popular civil rights history, seem to preemptively mark King as a figure